حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم تنزيلي بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. صدق الله العظيم. My dear brothers and sisters, there was a saying of the elders, the scholars attributed to the Prophet, Man arafa nafsahu arafa rabbahu, that the one who knows themselves knows their Lord. That the one who knows themselves knows their Lord. And part of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowing our own selves. What are the things, the values, the principles that we live by? What are the factors that go into every decision that we make? And so it's important for us to understand ourselves so that we don't get lost with everything that happens. It's easy to be good when times are good. But when there are calamitous times, when there are tragedies, when there's calamities, when there are difficult times, then that's when the metal is tested. And that's when the true self comes forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ittaqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad wattaqullaha inna Allaha khabirum bima ta'malun. He says that be mindful of Allah, and every nafs, every self should search for what they will bring forward on that day, on the day of judgment. Be mindful of Allah because He knows what you do. He is well informed of everything that you do. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. And don't be like those who forgot Allah, and as a result they forgot themselves. He made them forget themselves. When we forget Allah, we become lost. We are made to forget our own selves. What are we actually doing? How are we actually spending our life? And so it's even more important to understand our nafs, ourself. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. And I'll tell you the inspiration for this topic in the second part. But for now, let's focus on the nafs. The nafs, the self, it has these two parts, these two forces. Many a time they are competing forces. There is the physical body, the physical body. The physical body which has desires, which has hunger and thirst. And when you do not provide it with what it requires, then you feel the physical pain. When it is hungry, you feel the physical pain of hunger. When you are thirsty, you feel the physical pain of thirst. And that is one part of your nafs. That is the physical body that says yummy food, funny television, shiny iPhone 13. That all goes back to that physical one. The other force is the ruh, is the spiritual force. And that spiritual force, it predates the physical one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran that all the souls, all the arwah were gathered together and were made aware of the oneness of Allah and the lordship of Allah. And after that physical body, after the ruh leaves, the spirit leaves that physical body, then the physical body is dead. It returns to the dirt. But the spirit, it continues, the ruh, it continues to its next phase and its next phase. And the spirit, the ruh, it also has needs. The spirit, the ruh, it also has needs. Just like the physical body requires food and requires drink and other things, the spirit also has needs. The spirit must also be fulfilled. The spirit must also be satisfied. The spirit, its food must also be sought. Its thirst must be quenched. But the pain from the spirit, lack of spiritual fulfillment, the pain is not a physical pain, but rather it is a spiritual pain. We live in a society that is increasingly irreligious. And we also live in a society that is increasingly more sad, more depressed, more lonely. And you can argue about the stats all you want, but that is clear. That there is a connection between these things. Mental health is real, no denying that. But a part of that is the spirit that needs to be fed, that needs to be nourished. And so these two competing forces, the physical and the spiritual, what is their relationship and how do they evolve within our lifetime? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes the nafs with 3 different adjectives in 3 different places in the Quran. And each place, each context defines that stage of the nafs. The first type of nafs that is mentioned is an-nafs al-ammara bis-su, the inciting nafs, the commanding nafs. I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. I have to have it now, today. Make the order, pre-order it today so I get it. First day arrival, I have to have it now. That's an-nafs al-ammara. Where is this mentioned? In the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. When the wife of the Aziz attempts to seduce Yusuf. And Yusuf mentions this. He mentions this weakness of man. He mentions this weakness of human beings. And he says that the nafs is an inciting and a commanding force. And that is the physical realm. That is the physical body inciting and commanding for its needs and its desires to be fulfilled no matter the cost. And so that's the first stage. Sigmund Freud, he even talks about this. As you are born, your level of self is id, which is the selfish part. You might see the behavior of a toddler. A friend of mine also has a toddler. I have a toddler. We were complaining, the toddlers, they keep snatching from their younger siblings, everything. They want everything, mine, mine, mine. This spirit is not used to this physical body. It's getting used to it. It's an immature spirit. It's just come into the body. It's an immature spirit. Of course it will be fully controlled by an-nafs al-ammara, by the commanding self, by the inciting self. The self which wishes to claim no matter the cost. But then the nafs, it evolves and begins to realize. And that is where we have the nafs al-lawama. The scolding nafs, the blaming nafs, the nafs of reproach. That you do something and then you feel bad about it. You feel guilty. We call it our conscience. My conscience is telling me this. My conscience is telling me that. That's a nafs al-lawama. And that is where most people are. They don't give in fully into the animal side, the physical side. And they have a connection to the spiritual side, and they're in between those two forces. Then the last evolution is the one which is mentioned. The one which is mentioned in Surah Al-Fajr. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about those that are entering paradise. And He addresses those that are entering paradise. And He says, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'innah. O you content spirit. O you content soul. Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiya. Come back to your Lord now. Fully pleased and fully content and fully satisfied. وَدُخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي وَدُخُلِي جَنَّتِي. Be among my righteous servants. Be among them. Go and be among them. Your peers amongst the righteous servants. And enter my gardens and enter my paradise. Enter the abode which I have prepared for you. And that is the nafs which has been able to subdue the physical and has been able to become content and to be fulfilled and to be satisfied. And is not simply reaching for the next thing, the next this, the next that, but is content with its place in the world. Something which we seek but which we are afraid of. And so how do we get there? You can look at these three stages in a cynical way. You can plot them on a bell curve. You can say that there's one group that is one extreme, focused on the physical. And then there's the majority, which is the guilty. Those that feel guilt when they do wrong. And then you have those on the other end, which are content, where the spirit is satisfied. But instead of looking at it like that, it's a cynical way, because you say, well, I'm just part of the majority. Let me just concede. Let me forfeit. Let me surrender to where I am at. But let's look at the metaphor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us for our journey. Did He say some of you will be here, some of you will be... No, what does He say? Every single salah, every single prayer, what do we ask for? What do we ask for? Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. That this is not a curve. This is not, I'm one of these people or I'm one of those people. But this is a path. This is a journey. And each and every single one of us is somewhere on our own sirat, our own journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's why they say this Surah Al-Fatiha, this first surah of the Quran, it's Ummul Quran. It is the mother of the Quran. And in Arabic, when we say that something is the mother of something, it is the reference for something. It is the summary of something. It is the source of something. Imam al-Shafi'i, he wrote his great book on Islamic law. And he called it Kitab al-Umm. The mother book. Al-Fatiha is the mother of the Quran. It is the reference point. It is the source of the Quran. It is the summary of the Quran. Every verse has meaning. We start with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and His compassion on this journey that we're on. We start with Allah's mercy and His compassion. So don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like you have to give up. Don't feel like you have to surrender and give up to where you are and that's always where you're going to be. But rather start with Allah's mercy and His compassion. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Start with His praise. Realize who He is, Rabbul Alameen. He is the Lord of everything. The Rabb, the nurturer of everything, the nourisher, the sustainer of everything. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Again, His mercy and His compassion is repeated. Maliki Yawmiddin. He's the master of the Day of Judgment. We're going to go to Him. That's the end of that journey. The Day of Judgment is a part of that end of that sirat, that path. And what is the means? The means by which we are on that journey. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You alone we worship and you alone we seek help from. That is the means of this journey. That every step of the way we're engaged in that worship in its broader definition. And we're seeking help from Allah on that journey. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. We're not alone on this journey, but rather there have been those who have been on this path before. So don't feel like you're going at it alone. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. And we also have the examples of those who were not on that path, or who were and then came off of that path. And so we have these two competing forces, the physical and the spiritual. How do we nourish the spiritual, my brothers and sisters? We have gotten very good at nourishing the physical. The kinds of foods, the kinds of technology, the kinds of comfort that the majority of the world can only dream of. Very good at that. But when it comes to nourishing the physical, how are we doing that? How are we serving that part of ourselves? Because until we do, how will we ever reach an-nafs al-mutmainna? How will we ever continue on this sirat al-mustaqim? How will we ever do it? One sister, she's a convert, she was complaining. She said, I was given books on salah, on prayer. And all the books, they said, first do this position, then do that position, then do this, then do that. Say this and say that. Stand like this and do it. It didn't have anything in it about the spirituality of salah. All it had was the physical and the verbal. What should I be thinking about in my salah? What should I be focusing on in my salah? What is the purpose of salah? What is the point of salah? That's where we have to evolve past just the physical. Because the salah is a combination of the physical and the spiritual. And that's what makes us afraid of the salah. It makes us afraid of the salah. We are afraid of the salah. That if I commit to the prayer, what if it doesn't work? If I commit to that salah, what if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if I'm missing something? What if I'm not doing it right? And that fear of failure. We had a conversation last night about scholarships, where many people don't apply because they're afraid they won't get it. What's the point? Waste of time. But if everyone thinks that, then no one applies, and no one gets it. And they said that, well, just by applying, you are gaining benefits. You're applying to this scholarship. You're gaining the benefit of knowing how to apply for a scholarship and how to represent yourself and so on. And just by being in that position, you are starting on that trajectory. And it's the same with your prayer, my brothers and sisters. Maybe we are afraid that we're not achieving the spiritual goals of our prayer. But we have to come in with that fear and we have to put it out on the table. And we have to be honest with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of where we are at, and we cannot pretend. And when we are able to come to the prayer with that truth and with that honesty, then that is where it will begin. That is where that process will begin to bear fruit. Where we don't worry about the rest of everything, but we worry about where we are in this moment. Where we are at this moment. So that we can begin to nourish the Spirit, so that we can begin to nourish the Spirit and that spiritual aspect which we need today more than ever. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us to do that He helps us to bring the ruh into our physical and to fulfill and nourish the spiritual side of ourselves. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. I wanted to mention what sparked this topic. With 9/11, the 20th anniversary being last week, I was reading about this Mauritanian man. He memorized the Quran as a young boy, and he happened to be in the wrong place, wrong time, and he was detained in Guantanamo Bay with no charge. Detained indefinitely, where the CIA would come and practice their enhanced interrogation techniques on him, which means that's another way to say all kinds of torture, all kinds of physical torture. And while he was there for 14 years, they finally released him in 2016, again admitting that there was no charge and no evidence to hold him. But they were holding him, hoping for something to come up. But anyway, during his time in Guantanamo, he wrote 2 books. One of those books was about his time in Guantanamo. And the other one was how to find happiness in a hopeless place. And when he came out of Guantanamo, in many of the interviews that he did, he said, I forgive everyone. I forgive all of the captors, the torturers, I forgive everyone. So to be so apart from his physical self and to let his spiritual contentment take over, how do you get there? Even though your physical body has been through so much. And that book that he wrote, they turned it into a movie. They released it last year, The Mauritanian. You can learn about it. Not only that, but the guard who was watching or guarding his cell, standing outside of his cell, became his friend and converted to Islam. And they haven't given him his passport in Mauritania, but the guard actually visited him in Mauritania. Even though they took 14 years of his life away from him, I think I forgive them all. Think about that, my brothers and sisters. Think about how we can achieve that contentment and not become stuck simply in the physical side of our nafs. Because the physical side is just one part. And so I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us to do that. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He fulfills the needs of those in need. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us to elevate ourselves and bring us closer to Him. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the highest levels of paradise, that He reunites us with our lost loved ones. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He cures the sick. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us to beat this pandemic. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He protects our children. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He guides us and protects us. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us His shade on the day when there is no shade but His. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله يذكركم ولذكر الله تعالى أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله